Greetings and welcome to this academic year ending Campus Conversations. And today it's my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome Chancellor Christ for a discussion about the year that's passed and what lies ahead. As always, we're going to welcome your questions. For those of you who haven't submitted them already, they can be posted to our Facebook Live site. Carol, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Good to see you.
Likewise. So without further ado, perhaps a few reflections on the academic year that's coming to a close and some thoughts about what lies ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone who is listening for your contributions this year, for staff, for your incredible work, for faculty, your incredible research and teaching, and for students, for your work and hopes for successful completion of your year. So thank you. It's been a challenging year, I think, both because of adjusting to the end of the pandemic and also because of the graduate student strike. I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic because we've been so focused on its medical impact that I think we haven't spent enough time thinking about its psychological and social impact, that so many of us have been remote for significant portions of the last 2.5 years, I'd say. It's really been 3.5 since we started isolating because of the pandemic. And that is not only takes a toll in and of itself, but it really breaks our social patterns in ways that I think we're still recovering from. So I think paradoxically, this is a stressful time as we try to remake those patterns. And so I want to say first, I think it's been a hard year. I talked to a lot of staff and faculty who say they feel really burnt out. And I think it's because of the difficulty of the year. That said, there's an enormous amount that's gone on that's really exciting. We, in the campaign, the $6 billion campaign that we have that will end December 31st, 2023. So this December, we hit the goal 14 months early in November of 2022. So that's really extraordinary news with some extraordinary gifts for the campus, which is really good. We're at a moment of real building on the campus. Any of you who drive down Oxford Street will see Anchor House. It looks like it's going up a story a week. That's the residence hall that is dedicated to transfer students, and it's the biggest gift the university has ever received. And a stipulation of the gift is everything we save through not having long-term debt on that building, because it's a gift, will go to financial aid. So that's very exciting. People's Park is stalled, but we're working on trying to get a resolution of that so we can continue with the People's Park project. We also have 2 more residence halls in active planning, one on the corner of Bancroft and Fulton, another on the Channing Ellsworth parking lot. So we're really making good on our commitment to double the number of beds in our housing system within a 10-year period. I forgot to add that we're also have already started construction on graduate student housing in Albany near University Village. That's about 770 beds. So I'm really excited about the progress that we're making on housing. It really seems tangible now, whereas it had been just that, plans. In addition, you can see the gateway rising up from the Tolman site. And at this Regents meeting, the Regents will have the opportunity to consider, and I hope approve, the new College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. The campus has not founded a new college in over 50 years. So this is a very exciting moment. It's had a long time in its development, over 7 years, and it's the fastest growing major on campus. So that's extremely exciting. We have other projects that will begin construction in the fall. There is the addition to chemistry, Hescock Hall, up at the top of campus along Gailey Road. And there's the Center for Connected Learning, which will continue the renovation of Moffat Library, really constructing a real center for learning for undergraduates, not only library space, but also a space that undergraduates can access central kinds of programs and services. So that's really exciting. We're adding 2 floors to Bechtel. The groundbreaking has already happened for that project, though, as some of you may know, groundbreaking doesn't actually mean groundbreaking. It means they bring in a sandbox and you take a shovel of the sand, and that's the breaking ground. But the actual construction project will start before the fall. And then there's going to be a new classroom and LNS advising building that will be built on the Dwinell Hall parking lot. And I and all the others that park there will be very disappointed with parking going away, but that's really exciting. And then the research is so amazing that our faculty do. There have been so much progress in regard to research and climate research, in biomedical research, that's enormously exciting. And finally, there are the students. We're on Saturday graduating the class that entered in 2019. They were the students that went home thinking it was just going to be a few weeks in March of 2020 and wound up being, many of them, away for a year and a half. So this is a very special class that we're graduating on Saturday. And then, of course, there are the new students that we're welcoming. We had, again, 125,000 applicants for about 6,000 places. Those students have all signed their letters of intent. The transfer students haven't yet. Their deadline, I believe, is June 1st, but the freshmen, entering freshmen, have signed their letters of intent. I don't yet know what the new class is going to look like, but I'm excited that we have, again, splendid students coming in. We've been doing a lot of yield events to try to persuade those extraordinary students that we've admitted to choose us. So those are some of the things that have happened this year. Next year, I expect, first of all, we'll be ending our campaign on December 31st. We're going to have a big celebration, 4 years to the date of when we launched the campaign publicly. That'll be February 29th of 2024. And I expect our students and faculty to continue their extraordinary research, and we're going to see all these buildings springing up. So an exciting year in many ways.
Thanks for that rundown. It's kind of amazing you keep track of all that, given how much activity there is on campus. And that was a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. They're talked about burnout and stress and adaptation to change. You've been connected with this university for so long. How do you, when you step back, how do you assess our current health, our strength as an institution, as a community?
The word I think a lot about is resilience. I think resilience has characterized Berkeley throughout its history, and it's had many crises, many budget crises, many political crises. And it always has emerged from them, I think, stronger. And I believe that that's a quality that's important, not only to individuals, but to institutions. And I think the pandemic, though I certainly wouldn't wish it to happen if we're standing back at the beginning of it and had the power to do it, it's enabled us to develop online tools that we didn't have before, just like this conversation that we're having currently on Zoom. Online tools for instruction that I think are going to make instruction better. It's made us think more deeply, I believe, about the power of community, how important it is to us. So I believe that resilience is something particularly characteristic of the Berkeley campus. Maybe it's because we're, as almost as far west as you can be in the United States, and always looking for the next frontier. I think it's our scientific culture. I think it's our political culture. So I really think, there's always, Ben Hermelin, the provost, talks about how Berkeley has often in the past talked about doom and gloom. And yet it's always emerged from whatever challenges that have beset us, I believe, stronger for them than it was before. So I would say resilience is the most important characteristic.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with that for anyone who truly knows the university. And at the same time, you brought up at the beginning this issue of burnout. How do you hope we will address that? What's your message to people who are feeling maybe just a little maxed out after the last few years of challenges?
I take a good summer vacation is mostly what I would say. I think the summer is, for many people, certainly I'm planning on it, a time of renewal, a time for decoupling a bit from your job, and really taking time for family, for friends, whatever you like to do best. I think that's important. I also think, it's really, I've been struck in these conversations I've had about burnout that people often attribute it to their jobs, whereas my take on the situation is that it's in large part the result of the pandemic, of the world we're living in, where it seems to me there's this relentless parade of catastrophes, mass shootings, international crises, very combative, confrontational politics. And I think all of those things are contributing to burnout, not just the stress one might feel from one's individual job. I also really believe in letting go of aspects of your job. It's a little bit like, I think, an analogy is housekeeping, that you don't, stress yourself to remove every single dust bunny from your house. And I think the same thing is true in your job. Certainly in a job like mine, which could keep me busy more than 24 hours every day, I have to prioritize all the time and let things go that I don't think are worth my time. And I would encourage everybody to do that, to not feel like you have to spend the same kind of exhaustive and perfectionist energy on every piece of your job, and always to make time for relaxation, for family, for friends, for all of the things that are outside of the workplace. It's important in keeping you productive and happy in your job.
Yeah. What an interesting multi-layered answer, which resonates in many different ways. One of the other things that I think people are noting, and some may be concerned, some may be happy, and that's leadership transitions, leadership changes on campus. Can you run down the primary ones and maybe just give us a sense of what the plans are for replacing those who are leaving?
Well, of course, the one that I'm most conscious of is Rosemary Ray's retirement. She's been an extraordinary partner to me through 2 budget crises, and we're now in a third. So I'm, of course, very sad to see her go. We already have made an offer for an interim person to come in for a 2-year period. I can't announce who it is because the office, the president, has to approve it. But I'm very happy about the appointment. I think it's really going to be, the person is going to be really excellent in that role. And that person will overlap a little bit with Rosemary, and we'll have a very full orientation to all the financial and planning issues on the campus. Early next year, we'll be starting a search for the permanent role, but it seemed to me it was really important to have an interim, and an interim that would have some length of tenure. So that's how we're proceeding with that. Jen Stringer is another person who's leaving the campus, going to the Getty to take a wonderful position as the chief information officer there. And we've already started our search for her replacement, and we will appoint an interim, but not a long-term interim, as in Rosemary's case. And then there always are deanships that are in, we have a policy now that we, only in very unusual circumstances, encourage deans to stay longer than 10 years. So with as many deanships as we have, there are always some transitions there. So we'll be starting a number of dean searches. We just announced a new dean for the Berkeley School of Education. That's really exciting. So I think those are the main transitions.
Got it. And if you will, I don't want to ignore the chancellor in the room, but what are your own plans?
I'm thinking a lot about what I, when I want to retire, and certainly feel like I've done a lot of the things that I wanted to achieve. So I'm thinking a lot about that question.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Stay tuned. Before we talk about budget, I want to dive a little bit more into that. There were a couple of questions that came in from members of our staff that sort of relate to what we were talking about. And both of these questions had to do with reducing the bureaucratic burden.
Mhm.
And the questions are, how can we keep track? There's an initiative underway to reduce the bureaucratic burden. And you're being asked, how can we, meaning staff and faculty and students, I suppose, keep track of that initiative? And also, can you describe whatever plans currently or already exist for modernizing that bureaucracy?
Yeah, we're doing two things to bust bureaucracy, as the provost puts it. One is that he has a task force. I assume there'll be regular report outs from that task force about the progress that they're making, and indeed they are making progress. The other thing that we're doing are deep dives into some of our administrative units, trying to figure out whether they're doing business in the most efficient way possible, whether there are things they can simply eliminate. And then I would encourage everybody in their individual job to, if you think you're doing something that doesn't make any sense, to step forward and tell your supervisor about it. I know even in my job, there are things that I do and I just scratch my head about, thinking, why are we doing this? Is it really worth the effort? And so I would really encourage that. I think busting bureaucracy is both the provost's initiative, will also be a result of these reviews we're doing of administrative units, but I think it's all of our responsibility of trying to figure out, what are we doing that really doesn't make any sense, and we don't need to do it.
Right. And how best to keep track of that? Just check the web, or will we be campus messaging? How do people follow what's
I
going on?
assume that it'll be on the provost's website. I think that's a good way to keep track of it.
Okay, I hope Ben is
I've
listening.
become sort of cynical about Cal messages. I've talked to too many people who see Cal message at the top and just delete without even reading what it's about.
Okay, I hope Ben is listening today and understands that you've just given him a new task. Let's turn to the budget. You mentioned that in your initial remarks about a third financial crisis. We recently had a last campus conversation, delved into what could be an expected or what might be an $82 million deficit. Can you give us an update on the budget, what's happening with the state, and what the forecast is our financial forecast is.
Well, I spent all day yesterday in Sacramento, going from legislator office to legislator office, making the case for the 5% that's currently in the governor's budget, 5% increase in the budget of the University of California. I should say I got a very good response from the legislators that I was seeing. They seem to be of very good intention and supportive of the University of California. So I was really happy with my day. So there's that. It's really important for us to hold on to the 5% in a state budget that seems to look bleaker by the day.
Yeah.
But in addition, I first want to reassure people that we do have the money, despite the $82 million deficit, to balance the budget this year. We're going to use accumulated investments to balance the budget this year. But there is still an imbalance between the rate at which our expenses are growing and the rate at which our revenues are growing. The combination of cohort tuition that we now have, that's tuition that increases for entering students only and then stays stable throughout their time at Berkeley. The combination of what the state gives us, even at 5%, and cohort tuition simply doesn't equal the growth in our expenditures. I've always believed that it is better to generate new revenues than to cut, which is very painful, particularly after so many years of financial austerity. And so we're working very hard on trying to figure out how to generate new revenues. I've already talked about how successful philanthropy has been, but of course, philanthropy is lumpy. You can't go to a donor and say, please give me some money for deferred maintenance, or please give me some money for just the operations of the university. That in talking to a donor, you're very much trying to make a match between the university's needs and their passion about their legacy. So it's not like donors are not like an ATM. They're not like a shopping list. And so what we have to figure out is what is the appropriate system of taxation, if you will, of our revenues that are coming in for the common good. And that's how the financial reform is working, that Ben Hermelin is heading, is trying to think not only how we more transparent about our resources and about how we decide where resources are going, but what uniform system of taxation can we create across the campus that will enable us to fund the common good. We've already instituted one piece of that, and we've added 2.5% to what we call the philanthropic allocation. It's basically a gift tax. We've added 2.5% up to that, specifically for deferred maintenance, which is such a huge problem on the campus.
So one of the questions that just came in, just to drill down a little bit further, how would you assess progress on that financial reform? I think that's been a goal that's been spoken a lot about for many years. And I think people are really interested to know why you think this time will be different and how things are going.
I think this time will be different because we have more agreement about the terms and the questions with the academic senate. I think that the piece of financial reform that's about the temporary academic staffing budget is largely done, although I don't know if it's been communicated yet. So I think that every time I've talked to a campus that's engaged, the leadership of campus that it's engaged in this kind of financial reform, they do say the timetable is 4 to 5 years. So it's not something that you just leap into and expect is going to be finished in 6 months to a year. But I think we are making good progress. The pandemic, it really set us off the course we originally anticipated.
Let me turn to a question that came in from the audience that is financially related, and this is about, in general, salary increases. And the question is, what's the justification for giving everyone the same percentage increase? Is this the most equitable way to distribute budgeted funds for salary increases? Could the university be missing an opportunity to promote diversity by lessening economic disparity?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. And first I should say that the policy about salary increase is set by the office of the president. It's not set by the campuses. So Berkeley couldn't decide to do this on its own. Many of the workers that are paid less are in unions, and the union contract sets what not only the current salaries of those positions, but their rate of increase. The salary increase of 4.6% is for unrepresented staff and for faculty. And I think the decision to give it across the board really reflects the concern about inflation. Although I think whoever the questioner is makes a really interesting point. And I suppose if I were in the position of deciding how to do this, I might decide to do that. But again, that policy is set by the regents ultimately, but the proposal is made by the office of the president.
Got it. I see someone from the provost's office must be watching today. I just got a note saying that on the provost's website, the EVCP's website, there is indeed a tab for the Bureaucratic Burden Task Force. So folks who are interested in tracking their progress can head on over to the EVCP's website. Let me turn now to, I want to talk a little bit about another one of the goals that you've really prioritized and put front and center, and that is diversifying the campus's population. Give us an update about where things stand with the various initiatives and goals that we've set for ourselves.
So I should say first that I think there are two goals that we have related to diversity. One is to change our demographics. And I think we're making good progress there. I'm really interested in what the figures look like in diversity terms for the incoming class. I don't have those yet, so don't know. And we have been making strides in diversifying the faculty. There are a number of programs that exist that I think have been very successful. Cluster hires, faculty searches with much more general rubrics have been really quite successful in diversifying the faculty. Of course, it's a long process because faculty stay on the average about 30 years. The progress among staff is good in kind of lower classifications and job categories, but less successful, I would say, in leadership. And so I think that's something we need to work on. But we've been making good progress with the student body and good progress with faculty. But that's only half the problem is the demographics. Even more important, I think, is making sure that everyone feels like they belong, that they're respected for who they are, that they can bring their whole self to work. So we're really working on that. I think Dania Matos has been an extraordinary leader in her various thriving initiatives that we have for each segment of the population as defined by ethnicity, race, and ethnicity. So I think it's as important to thrive at Berkeley as it is to have diverse representation in various categories of our community. And so that's one of my goals, certainly. I talk a lot about equity of opportunity. That means that for our students, that students have the same access to STEM majors, for example, the same access to study abroad, the same access to research opportunities. So it's as important that we think about the experience that students have available to them as the demographics of the student body. Similarly with staff, I'm really committed to career ladders on the campus, making sure we're creating internal ladders or paths to advancement that give opportunities to the people who are working so well for us.
And what's the status? There are two federal designations I know the university is seeking. One is a designation is, let's talk about the first one, a Hispanic Serving Institution. Are we on track? How's it going?
We're on track, and the goal for that is 2027. So a few years to go, but we're really on track. The goal there is 25% of our undergraduate student body is Latinx. And I think we might break 20% this year, which will be really good. The other designation that we're working for, and we're very close, is ANAPISI, that's Asian American, Native American Pacific Islander. I think there'll be a campus announcement about that soon.
Oh, fantastic. I want to turn now to another question that came in from folks watching. I know it's an issue of concern, and that is any updates on school safety, on securing campus buildings. We also got questions, concerns about unhoused people sleeping on campus. And not to load too much, perhaps I think a lot of people haven't had an opportunity to meet our new police chief yet.
Yeah, Yogananda Pittman, she's really wonderful.
Yeah, so perhaps a few words about her and just in general, your take on where things stand with safety concerns that have been expressed by parents and members of the campus community.
So Yogananda comes to us from the Capitol, where she was #2 in command in the January 6th uprising. So used to complex environments in which there's a combination of keeping order and protecting. So that's, she's really brought such fresh eyes to us. So that's really good. We're working toward a tiered policing system in which we want to use armed officers only for the kinds of incidents where there is violence or crime that is threatened. Whereas we're using a new category of officer who will not be in police officer clothes to do the more routine jobs of keeping order. So every time, I don't know, skateboarders making a racket, you don't have an armed police officer showing up. And the thing that I'm most excited about that we've already had a soft launch for this semester is a mental health response team. So when you have a wellness crisis or a mental health crisis, who we send is not an armed officer or not trained to handle such crises, but rather someone who has been trained in responses to crises in mental health. We sometimes call them wellness checks. In regard to safety on campus, we're thinking hard about it and about how best to assure safety. I think it's not so much a problem on the campus proper as in the part that's just outside of campus. So we're thinking hard about how to do that. I encourage everybody at night to use our walk service, and Berkeley is a city, and you have to use your city skills. That said, we're deeply committed to a safe environment, but it is to talk about the past place that I led, Northampton, Massachusetts. It's not Northampton, Massachusetts, and you cannot leave your house unlocked and your car unlocked, as everybody in Northampton did. It's a city. And demands city skills, but we should also have city safety guards. I realize that may be, maybe not a good example because there's been so much criticism of the protection of safety in our cities. In regard to homelessness, we have a social worker who is on the chancellor's office a staffing list. whose job, his name is Ari Newlight, to deal with homeless people. We don't use a police response. If you see people camping on campus, they are not allowed to camp on campus, but you have to tell someone. It's not enough to just say, oh, why isn't someone coming around? Because our people can't be everywhere. But we use a helping and counseling policy strategy with homeless people. But camping is not allowed in campus structures like parking garages or on campus itself. And if you see someone, you should tell someone so that the appropriate person can offer help to that homeless person.
Yeah, and I may be wrong, correct me if I am, but my understanding from our police department also is that unhoused people don't really pose a safety threat and that it's not really a law and order issue, which is what your answer seems to suggest. Is that your understanding as well?
That's exactly right. I think homelessness is one of the tragedies of our time. It really embarrasses me about our country that we tolerate the kind of human wretchedness that you see often on the street among homeless people. As many of the listeners may know, part of the People's Park project involves a permanent supportive housing for the homeless. It's permanent, it's not a shelter, and it's supported housing. It means the services are actually in the building that many homeless people need. We offered housing when we thought we were going to be able to start the People's Park project last summer. We offered housing to, there were about 60 campers in the park at that point. We offered housing to them all at a motel that the city and the campus were jointly renting. We faced a lot of skepticism. People said, oh, people like to camp outside. They're not going to accept this offer of housing. All but 3 of the people camping in the park accepted the offer of housing. And we're committed to, whenever we proceed on the People's Project, making sure to offer anyone camping in the park housing.
Got it. Now I want to circle all the way back to something you mentioned in the beginning. You talked that we have a Regental vote upcoming on the establishment of a new college, computer data science and society. And it seems like the fates conspired pretty nicely in terms of the explosion of AI. I mean, it's all you hear about these days. And Berkeley is sort of the leading center, in the world for AI research. The chief engineer for ChatGPT is a Berkeley grad. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about it, whether as an English professor, you just feel like you're on the sidelines, or do you have sort of skin in the game here?
First of all, I think humanists very much have skin in the game. If you read the newspapers about AI, as I do, and probably everybody does, you know the profound ethical questions that are being asked about it, and the profound existential questions too. What does it mean to have an intelligence? Can you call it an intelligence that is non-human? What kinds of, I've heard a number of computer scientists tell me they just don't understand how these programs in fact work. So what does that mean? What does it mean that these programs make stuff up, that they lie? And I've long been interested. Frankenstein is one of my favorite books. The question that Frankenstein asks is, if you create a non-human creature with powers of reasoning, what are your obligations to that creature? And what rights do they have? I'm fascinated by the fact that novelists have, particularly in the last decade, been writing books. Ishigura's novel, Clara and the Sun, for example, they have been confronting this very issue. So I think imaginative literature has a great deal to teach us about the questions that AI raises. Philosophers certainly have a lot to teach us about the ethics, about its use. And this college, in addition, of course, to our College of Engineering and the EECS department in that college, has an enormous amount to, that's so exciting what they're discovering. There used to be a lot of fear of what was called the singularity, the intelligence that was going to be greater than human intelligence and take over the world. And Ken Goldberg is a professor in engineering, talks about we should be thinking about not the singularity with some fear, but rather about the multiplicity and how AI can in fact enhance human life and human enterprise.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. Interesting to hear. Everybody's got a different balance of fear on the one hand and excitement on the other. So interesting to hear that. I want to turn now to another question that came in from the audience. And this is, what are you as chancellor doing to reach the countless conservatives who fear harassment, discrimination, and possible termination for revealing their political affiliation on campus? We're part of the diversity. I, this person says, have already been retaliated against. Certainly, this is a huge concern for many. I should just start by saying, and just reiterate for everyone, that if you believe you've been retaliated, discriminated against, again, see something, say something, report it to, we have an office for the prevention of harassment and discrimination. But beyond that, Carol, what's your response to people? This isn't the first time we've heard this. People who are conservatives, who are on that side of the political spectrum, and do feel at times that it's a difficult environment on the Berkeley campus. What are your commitments and thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, when I address audiences about free speech, I often ask the question, who among you comes from a mixed political family? And I'm always amazed at the number of hands that go up. I myself come from a mixed political family that has people with very conservative and very liberal attitudes in it. So I think more people have the experience of what I'll call political diversity than we may think. I think part of the answer to the question that's been asked is calling on our principles of community, as I do often, and that we owe each other respect, even if we profoundly disagree with their ideas. One of the things that I feel very good about is we've had a number of very conservative speakers speaking on a campus without disturbances. And I see that as a sign that we are making some progress, although I always, warn myself not to be too complacent about this progress, because in our world is a volatile one, and our student body changes by more than a quarter every year. So, the community is always changing too.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure that what I said at the beginning about reporting, that's something that you endorse, or whether you have anything to add to that about what people should do if they feel they've experienced perspective-based discrimination or retribution.
Well, it depends a bit on the situation. Certainly, there are grievance procedures available to you if you suffered discrimination for your views. But I also think that conversation provides a really important resource. And again, it's very situational. You wouldn't do this if you were, someone were yelling at you on Sproul Plaza. But if someone who's a coworker, for example, says something, you can say something back, not angry, but you can say, I'm a person, that hurts me. Or let's have a conversation about what you just said. So I also believe people should feel, depending on the situation, is if they have a power of agency, not by yelling, but just by having a conversation.
Yeah, and I hear you saying that sense of belonging, of community that you talked about earlier, should expand across the entire community without regard to one's political perspective. Do I have that right?
That's exactly right. Yes.
A related question came in from the audience. Somebody asked, there was a controversial speaker, let's say at a different university, who deeply upset the person who posed the question, and they wondered why you didn't speak out in a campus message. Rather than delve into the specifics, which were very specific in this instance, I'm wondering just generically, in a broad sense, how you think about when you need to send a campus message, taking into account your previously expressed skepticism about Cal messages.
Yeah, I've been trying to, we've been talking a lot about what the policy should be about chancellors' messages. And whenever I get together with university presidents, university chancellors, we talk about this. When do you speak? What do you speak about? If I spoke about everything that gave me pain in the world today, there would be a constant stream of email coming from my office. When I speak, I try to speak only about things that are directly relevant to the University of California at Berkeley. I wouldn't ever criticize another institution for a conservative speaker. First of all, I know from our policy here that it's not the institution that invites the person. It's a registered group of some sort, so that there should be no assumption that because a speaker of particularly abhorrent views speaks on a campus, the campus holds those views. And also, I just don't speak out on things that happen at other institutions, just as I expect people not to speak out at things that happen at Berkeley. And I certainly don't know an instance when a president or chancellor of another university has spoken out about Berkeley, though certainly people are not shy about saying what their opinions are about things that happen at Berkeley.
Yeah. I'm curious what you make of, there's been so much reporting lately about the so-called cancel culture, about free speech, about political strife on campuses, about faculty being sanctioned or students being. Where do we stand in that? What's your sense in terms of higher education as a whole across the country about these currents that seem to be washing up on our shores so much lately?
I think it's a very complex question that on the one hand, there were, as a student of the Victorian period, I know that, people in other centuries and other decades even held points of view that we now strongly disagree with, think are racist, think are intolerant. And we're involved in a process that's sometimes painful. It's kind of painful historical reckoning. Think about the removal of statues of the Confederacy, for example, that's happening, of trying to determine what our public names, statues, language means. And I think for the most part, that's a really healthy process of changing our language, of understanding. Oh, for example, I think of the Native American mascots, understanding when something that seems part of an institution's culture is demeaning to a particular population in that culture. But it's a process that's never going to be a simple and straight, clear, white line. That maybe white was a bad word to use there, but a simple and clear line of progress. There's always going to be debate back and forth. And I think the important thing is to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And that I think that sort of moving to the point of canceling something before having the conversation is probably not healthy.
Yeah. You mentioned just now of Native American mascots. Just brings to mind something else I forgot to ask you about earlier, and that is your assessment of where things stand with our repatriation efforts of and Native American, indigenous, ancestral remains and cultural and sacred objects. There's been a lot of coverage about that, a lot of criticism for our past practices. Where do things stand with that, with our effort to improve relationships with the tribes and move forward?
Well, first of all, I want to say I think a deep wrong was done to Native American people by collecting their remains for scientific and museum purposes. We are trying, it's a very high priority of mine, to return the remains and associated artifacts as quickly as we can. I wish the progress were faster. It's often a complex negotiation with tribes and between tribes. UCLA did something that I wish we could do here, which is they reached an agreement with the tribes whose remains they held to have a single burial of those remains on a piece of UCLA land. It was remote from the campus. It's not on the campus itself. But I really want to make progress. We're appointing, we are doing a search for someone who will sit in Chris Treadway's governmental affairs office, who will be a tribal liaison. So we'll create a single door for tribes wishing to have some engagement with the campus, whether it's about remains or something else. We also have added significant numbers of staff just to the repatriation project, so that can proceed as quickly as possible.
Another question that came in, this one is about admissions. It says, we appreciate how UC Berkeley has been putting in place policies that facilitate more equitable access and admissions. And we know that faculty value students who are inquisitive and curious, eager to learn. How is Berkeley putting these student traits front and center in the admissions process?
Well, it's a good question to ask Femi Ogundelli, our director of admissions, but we have embraced, indeed, we are a leader in holistic review of students and look very much for those qualities of temperament that mean that somebody is going to be a good and eager learner when they come to this campus. One of the things that makes me sad is that with 125,000 applications, there are many more of those students than Berkeley can possibly serve. I have conversations with alumni often. Oh, I can't believe that my friend's, son or daughter wasn't admitted. She's so brilliant. What happened? And there are lots of those students who would thrive at Berkeley, who would be wonderful contributors to our community. And just the sheer numbers, mean that we don't admit a large number of them.
I wanted to just step back even just for a second. When you and I sort of met briefly to discuss today's conversation, you mentioned that you felt this was a pivotal moment in higher education. Why do you think that, and what did you mean by that?
It's a pivotal moment because it's something I referred to earlier. The pandemic has created this whole new language of digital instruction, which many faculty, perhaps all faculty, are familiar with in ways that they weren't before. So if you were to have a conversation about online instruction or digital instruction before the pandemic, you would have faced a lot of resistance and skepticism. Now the conversations are different. So you have, on the one hand, a new set of tools, and you have, on another hand, you have enormous pressure to get into universities like Berkeley at the same time that other colleges that are less competitive in their admissions are closing their doors. So there is this, it's almost like a barbell effect. You have these swollen applicant pools for very competitive institutions and no applicants at all for ones that are less competitive or that are small and rural. And so that's a huge problem for higher education. And then you add to that the problem of cost, where the cost is just going beyond the capability of, I'm thinking particularly of private institutions, many families to afford, and the very complex way in which private schools use merit aid to try to create operating budgets that are sufficient for them. It's just, I believe that it's a pivotal moment. It's a pivotal moment for public institutions, in that state support, I think, in all the states has really lessened. And public institutions are trying to come up with these mixed models of financing that are a real revolution in certainly public higher education financing. So lots of reasons that this is a pivotal moment. I think that there's lots of concern about jobs, both higher education preparing for our graduates for the workplace, which I believe we should, but also concerns about obsolescence. So there's this really weirdly schizophrenic characteristic about the debate. On the one hand, you have people questioning the value of higher education. On the other hand, you have these swollen applicant pools. What does that mean? And then the distance between discoveries in the laboratory and their commercialization in the marketplace has gotten shorter than it's ever been, and that creates both new opportunities and new dilemmas for universities. So many reasons that this is a moment.
That's fascinating. What do you make of data that seem to suggest there's a growing partisan divide regarding people's perceptions of the value of higher education, with less support among people who tend to vote Republican and greater support among people who tend to vote Democrat? Are you concerned about the politicization of the academy in that
I'm very
regard?
concerned about the politicization of the academy. I think higher education is good. It is our surest path to social mobility and wealth, if not wealth equalization, at least the building of wealth for families that have not traditionally had wealth. And I find the things that are happening in states like Florida or Texas really frightening. Using higher education as a kind of weapon in political fights, when I think it's so important for our country and for the economic prosperity of our country to have a really robust higher education system.
Thanks. Before we end, we're going to take a sharp topical turn, as is often the case. No campus conversation with you would be complete without at least one question about athletics, and there were many. But I'll take one that seems to be of great interest to a number of people, which is your thoughts about UCLA moving to the Big Ten and what that portends for Cal and whether we're going anywhere.
First of all, no, not to my knowledge are we going anywhere. I was very disappointed in what UCLA and USC did. I think that it is not good for student athletes to have to do as much travel across the country as they're going to have to do. I feel that our athletes are students first, not athletes first. And so would hope that any change we make in college athletics thinks first and foremost about the student experience. It's a time of enormous volatility and change in college athletics. There is the name, image, likeness without any guardrails, and some campuses taking enormous advantage of the freedom it gives them to offer signing bonuses in the millions of dollars to athletes. I find that very, very concerning. There are the number of lawsuits proceeding through the courts that would make athletes employees rather than students. There's conference instability. So a very difficult moment in college athletics There are no easy answers. I, someone who knows rather little about athletics, spend a lot of my time thinking about it because it's so, the questions are so hard at the moment. But the Pac-12 meetings are actually this coming Monday, and I'll know a lot more about from those, but we don't have any plans to move anywhere at this moment, and I would never make a move that would involve that kind of extensive travel for our athletes.
Yeah, thanks for that. Closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
I just want to thank everybody again. I know that these are challenging times. I know that sometimes you come to work or you come to your classes or your labs burnt out. But I really believe as we continue to recover from the pandemic, we're going to recover some of our sense of joy. And indeed, I already see it in some of my daily experiences, and I know we'll see lots of it at graduation.
Super. Chancellor Christ, thanks so much for your time and for great answers to a number of complicated questions. And on behalf of all of us who work to bring campus conversations to the campus community, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you again next year.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks.